Hello and welcome to today's session number 5. I'm so happy that you could be here today. I'm Mr. Fowler and I'm joined today by Madison. I'm sure that several of you will be joining after this particular session has started, but I'm going to let you go ahead and just jump in when and if you get here. But I'm going to start now. Madison and I are going to discuss a few things. If you have questions or concerns, as always, you can contact me or just review this session on desire to learn. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to use the share screen and I'm going to find this page, this one, the peer review self-assessment. So for the peer review self-assessment, this is a worksheet that you can download directly from Desire to Learn in the course content module. You'll also be able to download this as a file separately in the, I want to say it's in the course announcements area for today, session number 5. So if for some reason or other you're viewing this in the future and you can't find access to that particular document, don't hesitate to contact me. But if you've watched this video first, you should be able to find it without any issue. Okay, let's look at some of the specifics. So obviously this is titled your peer review sheet, essay 1, the self-assessment. The first blank here is for your name. So this is where you reveal the name of yourself as a peer reviewer. And this might be particularly important during an online session where not everyone is as aware of names or is as familiar with a particular name of a student as they might be under normal circumstances. Then we run into the first kind of tricky part of this activity. It says title. So not everybody gave their self-assessment essay a unique and interesting title. You may be resigned to the fact that you're just going to have to write self-assessment essay. That's all right. Now, everybody should have received some kind of suggestion or at least a notification, a question pushing them to create a better, more unique title, a snappier title, as I said in the commentary. So do the best that you can, and if there is no distinctive title on the student piece that you're reviewing, go ahead and just call it self-assessment essay. Next, you have author. So this is not your name, but this is the name of the peer review student whose paper you have chosen to review. So essentially, it's your name, their paper title, their name for the first 3 ideas here, the first 3 blanks. All right, let's read through the overview together. Writing in both college and in life requires more than simply channeling your own thoughts and feelings onto paper. As we're learning through our discussions, being a writer means being involved in a dynamic, multifaceted conversation about complex topics. So in order to be effective in this work, writers have to understand who they're talking to, or A, your audience, and B, what is likely to be compelling that specific audience. Similarly, when we offer feedback about other writers' work, we need to make choices about what we suggest as well as how we suggest it. So as you read and comment on your workshop partner's paper, think about the kind of feedback that you find most helpful. Keeping in mind that it's important to be both conscientious of what works well within his or her draft and identifying some of those specific elements that can be improved upon. the questions that you'll see in this particular document are designed to help guide your comments with respect to particular requirements for our first essay assignment. So here are the peer review questions. And I've said that you can expand on the space provided here, so you don't have to feel that you should create a short or limited response because of how I've arranged the questions on the page. It should be a digital copy that you can interact with, so you should just be able to create more space as you type along. But here are the questions that are of most concern for this particular session. What were the author's key strengths as a writer and reader according to the essay? Try to name at least one important strength that they have identified. What, if any, concerns did the author identify in the essay? Now, I will say that almost all of the students in this particular session did a very good job of really making sure that they addressed concerns that they themselves had about the writing process or issues that they had encountered in previous courses or previous writing experiences. On occasion in the past, I have had a rare student that says, I really don't have that many hang-ups or foibles with writing. Good for them. But like I said, this time I don't think anybody should run into that particular problem. So that's why I say, what, if any, concerns did they identify in the essay? Is there an effective hook that brings you in as a reader? This could be a question that's asked at the beginning of the essay and then answered. This could be an anecdote or unique or interesting quotation to start the essay. There could be a whole host of potential ways to grab the reader's attention and bring them into the essay. So is there an effective hook? If not, would you suggest that they add one? That'd be a great way to answer this question. Then there are a couple of easier questions. Does this essay's format adhere to the assignment description? Are there multiple body paragraphs? And does the author use transitions effectively? Fairly common occurrences, and I think that for the most part, all students addressed these issues adequately, even during the draft phase. Is there a clear thesis? Can you understand what the writer's goal is as a reader before you exit the first paragraph? If not, is the thesis in an area that still allows you to access the meaning behind what it is they're trying to say? And does the author need to use effective in-text or parenthetical works cited page citations? This is kind of a default question that I have on all of these kinds of student peer review worksheets. So for this particular essay, you can say, no, the author does not need to use in-text or parenthetical citations. It just wasn't a requirement for this particular assignment. Okay. So, hello, Marcellus. How are you doing today?
Hey, man, I'm doing fine. Sorry I'm a little late.
That's okay. So now you and Madison both have the rundown. Do you have any initial questions about the peer review worksheet? And don't feel bad about asking a question, because if you've got a question, there are chances are that some of your fellow students will probably have a similar or even the same question.
Okay, I just got in, so are we okay to just download that template sheet and just kind of plug in our answers there? Is that okay?
Yep, that's absolutely
Okay.
perfect. That's how I intended it to work.
Okay, and also, where would we go to see the like another peer review to review or another essay to review? How would we go about getting that? Okay.
Yep, that's a great question. There are a couple of different ways to do this. Last semester, I set up a whole separate pane in the Desire to Learn page with all of the essays listed with a specific title. And I thought that was going to work really well because I assumed everybody would pick one of those essays. But what happened was, unfortunately, I had 2 or 3 students who got 2 to 3 responses per essay, and then I had some students who didn't exchange. So there were people who didn't get any kind of peer feedback because no one picked their essay. And that kind of felt sad for them. And then I had to go ahead and do a little extra work because I had to go back and email them a copy of a student essay. So rather than do that again, I am going to give you an opportunity to reach out to a student that you may have become familiar with in the discussion forums. Maybe you like the way they addressed a question or answered a query that you had posed to them, and you feel comfortable or you're with them, or maybe you're developing a little bit of a rapport, in which case you may use, and I'm going to go back here to my homepage, you may use this link, the class list link on the homepage, and that gives you access to all of their student emails. Now, not every student is even comfortable with this methodology. So I will at least, after giving you that opportunity, I will email each one of you individually with an anonymous peer review draft that you can use to grade or to complete this essay. So I'll send that out to you as the short version of the long-winded answer I just gave you.
Okay.
Does that work?
Yeah, that works for perfectly fine.
Okay.
Do you know how soon you'll have those emailed to us?
Yeah, I will email you using the class email links, and then you'll all have a copy of that particular paper. If you'd like to make a request, though,
All right,
like
thank you.
I really like to review Madison's paper, let's just say as an example, you can email me a request, and then I could just email you the document back. So that would work.
Okay.
Same
Sounds
thing,
good.
Madison, if you have a particular peer review partner in mind, email me, and I'll try to make sure that I set that up for you so that you can have access to that. Great questions. Any other questions?
No, I'm all right.
Madison, how about yourself? Any other questions?
Good.
Okay.
I'm good.
Well, then I'm going to go ahead and move on to today. We're continuing our discussion about chapter 0, 1, 2, and 3 in Ready Player One. And I'm going to start off with a moment from page 17. So if you have this edition and you want to read along, you can find this on the, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's the 4th full paragraph on page 17. So again, in this chapter, Wade is sort of setting up his interpretation of the way the world that he was born into operates. And he explains on page 17 that it also turns out that burning all of those fossil fuels had some nasty side effects, like raising the temperature of our planet and screwing up the environment. So now the polar ice caps are melting, sea levels are rising, and the weather is all messed up. Plants and animals are dying off in record numbers, and lots of people are starving and homeless. And we're still fighting wars with each other, mostly over the few resources that we have left. So part of what this book does and what Ernest Cline is out to do as an author is to showcase a world where we have one generation, maybe two generations of time removed from the publication date. So working off of a text like this one in 2020, I think we feel some of these issues a little bit more keenly than we might otherwise. I believe the film version gives Wade's date of birth as being in, I think, 2021. So next year, more or less. The book takes place in about 2045, 2044. There's a little discrepancy there. The film is certainly grounded in the year 2045, whereas the book, I believe, makes allusions to the year 2044. It's kind of splitting hairs, but I believe there was a need on the behalf of the director, Steven Spielberg, to crouch the film in 2045. Anybody familiar with what's supposedly significant about 2045?
I can't say that I am.
What's that?
I said I can't say that I am aware of what's significant about
That's
2045.
okay.
You mean in the real world?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, yeah, no, I couldn't say.
Okay, that's
Isn't
fine.
it
Yep.
Isn't it something to do with life extension and immortality?
Yes. Go ahead. Tell us a little bit about that. What do you know about that? Or what have you heard about?
I'm pretty sure it's something to do with like hearing diseases that cause illness, and then like discovering the cure for like death or something.
Yeah.
It's like ridiculous.
Yes. Okay. So yes, you are on the right track. So there are groups of people who kind of define themselves as futurists, which means they look at how should I say this? They perform some analytical research given what they know now, and they put it into an algorithm of one type or other, and they extrapolate potential realities that could come to bear on our future in reality. Now, several of these things are often flights of fancy. But every once in a while, what is unique about these people, these futurists, is that they do trip across a couple of things that actually come to fruition. One of which was in the past was the creation of this infrastructure, the internet, as an accessible, ready means of global communication. They said that that was going to be a potential possibility by the 80s. And in some capacities, there was a primitive internet available out there as far back as like 83, 84. In fact, one of the texts that's referred to often in this book, the film War Games, talks about a young man who has an internet modem and is able to actually, by accident, connect to the strategic defense programs in NORAD. That's pretty far afield from the average computer user's experience in 1983. So every once in a while, like I said, they trip across ideas. But the big thing that is predicted for 2045 is this, what they call the singularity. And the singularity is exactly what you alluded to, Madison. It's this supposed moment where technology becomes so much of a presence in our lives that it's virtually, pun intended there, it's virtually impossible to live without technology. And that may include some technologies that extend life. Now, while they probably will never find a way to effectively end death, there are some developments on the horizon that can significantly slow the aging process, and that play into the advancement of medicine to such a degree that the extension of life into 90 to 100 years may become commonplace. One of the most exciting developments that I've heard of is a actual micro machine. That sounds, I can't think of the true phrase that I want right now. I'm grasping for it. But and there, I got it. Just took a second. A nanobot that can go into your bloodstream, and it's equipped with a little drill, so that if someone were to be suffering from late stage cancer, this nanobot would have one function only, which is to find a cancer cell, attach itself, and then essentially drill into the cell, drill the cancer out of the cell essentially, and then it would kill that cancer cell. Now, this is actually being run as a trial right now on mice, which might seem pretty far afield from being an effective technique for humans, but it has so far proven effective in mice. And mice are the testing stage before large-scale mammals. So they'll test it in mice. If it continues to be successful, they'll move it into dog and chimpanzee trials. And then from dog to chimpanzee trials, they'll start the first human trials. So by 2045, a technology like this, just as one example, might be something that actually comes to fruition. So that's why 2045 is such a significant year. It's supposed to be referred to as the singularity, the year where technology and our lives become finally so integrated that living life without the technological beats that we developed up until that point and going forward would be virtually unthinkable. There's a lot of speculation about that. So anyway, I just wanted to bring that up as a topic because it might arise as an issue when we're discussing the timeline of the novel. Any other thoughts or questions about that before we move ahead?
Don't they also think like robots are gonna take over?
Yeah.
I think that was another one I heard.
That is part of the singularity, that AI might finally be able to pass the Turing test, which means a computer consciousness might be advanced to the point that it's able to, mimic something like human behavior. However, of all the futuristic theories, near the end of 2020, we can actually suggest that we don't have an AI that's anywhere close to being that advanced. Besides that, we really don't have a very concrete grasp of human consciousness, meaning we don't really know what it means to be conscious.
Well, right.
Yeah, we have trouble with that. So defining that would be a first step that we'd have to make before we were ever able to advance in AI, and we're not there yet. We're not even close. So unless something happens relatively quickly in that field, we'll probably be okay. No Terminator for us. Okay, great question. Any other questions?
Is that your dog?
Yeah, sorry about that. It's actually a neighbor's dog. If it's distracting, I can close the door. Maybe to make her more quiet.
You're fine.
Okay, all right. Sorry about that. Any other questions, though? Hold on. I will go close the door. And of course, as soon as I close the door, she stops barking. But anyway, that's perhaps going to be less distracting for us. Any other questions before we move ahead or move back into the text?
Nope.
Okay, sorry again about that interruption. All right, so Wade Watts theoretically could be born in the next couple of years. So I think for readers, one of the forms of anxiety that the author, Ernest Cline, really wants to work in this text is the idea that we as readers are the group of people, we're the generation that leaves a world much worse for wear to Wade and his generation. We didn't heed the multiple warnings to adjust our behaviors for the benefit of the future of mankind. And as a consequence, we get a world like Wade's. So that's one of the fears and phobias that Cline builds into the structure of this novel. And that leads us to today's article that I'm going to share, use to share a screen here, which is this piece, Matthew Simmons' Shock to the System. This is from the Predict and Prevent series of articles that is available through Opposing Viewpoints. Now, Opposing Viewpoints is a module that Kishwaukee College subscribes to and is accessible to you as students and scholars through the library links. So if you like what you see here, you may want to turn to Opposing Viewpoints to get a greater sense of what kind of research topics are out there and are available. So in this piece, minimize it a little bit, Matthew Simmons talks quite a bit about the very real potentials for an impending global energy crisis. And this is where the novel and reality begin to sort of touch just a little bit in terms of the scope that it's covering. Most of the social ills from our novel that are described in the first few chapters, the kind of doomsday scenario, if you will, stem from fears that were very popular during the era that's now become known as the Great Recession. So this was roughly from 2012 through the end of 2015, maybe even through 2016. And this was a time of great anxiety in which the concerns over continued fighting in the Middle East was generating a lot of anxiety. And we also saw connections between our desire for cheap and readily available fossil fuels tying into global action in areas in the world that were rich in fossil fuels, but were socially and politically unstable. So a lot of people began to see connections, and they said, you know, because of the instability in these regions, and because of our need for fuel, this would be a good time to sort of look for alternative methods to restructure our ecosystem and restructure our economy in order to adjust for a different reality, or perhaps a better reality. Along the same lines, there began to develop a concern over the technique of fracking which is going, well, let me pause. Let me ask you, are either of you familiar with fracking as an environmental uh, process?
Yes.
Go ahead and tell us what you know
Yeah, I've
about.
heard the term.
You've heard of the term. Okay, so you both are somewhat aware. Madison, go ahead, and I'm by no means an expert on fracking, but I know enough about it. But rather than listen to me just keep talking, Madison, go ahead and tell us what you know about that process.
Fracking is the process of drilling using high pressure water and using water to push the oil up to the surface.
Mm-hmm.
It's so depending on who you talk to, it's been linked to earthquakes.
Mm-hmm.
It's also been linked to a few years ago in Flint, was it Michigan?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Where they could literally like open the tap and light the water on fire because there was something in it. Because the chemicals or whatever oil and stuff they were drilling with and were naturally occurring got into the water table,
Yeah.
which is where we pull water out of.
Absolutely. All of that's fairly accurate. The process itself, you described perfectly. So what it is you said it. They use high pressure water gauges to, and they pump that into the ground, and they basically break up a rocky part of the Earth's substructure, which is referred to as shale. So they drill down into the shale layers in certain areas that have rich enough deposits, and they pump this water in, and it sort of breaks up this rocky shale. And that shale can then be sucked up, back up through the ground, and it can be broken up even further and processed and refined into crude oil, and then refined further into oil that can be used. Now, this is really a boon economically for the United States, because for the first time, I think it was in 2017, I believe, for the first time since before the 1970s, the United States produced more barrels of oil than the Middle East did. Pretty shocking stuff. However, as you suggest, and as the story in Flint, Michigan, has also, it's been linked to that same phenomenon. Some environmentalists have raised some questions. And the questions are, I must admit, or I feel that they're logical questions to be asked. If you disturb the foundations of some of these areas, especially in a heavily populated area like the one outside and around Flint, Michigan, you're going to be drilling really close to extant infrastructure like sewers and water refineries that could potentially be contaminated by some of the runoff from this the shale area. And we do know that there are major issues in Flint, Michigan today uh, concerning contaminated water supplies. And some people, I think, have a good cause to look at that and say, while causation doesn't necessarily equal, consistency, or however that phrase goes, they're looking at the fact that they're drilling into this area, and then there's water problems that hadn't existed before this drilling, and they're asking questions about it. And that's, I think, a very logical move to make. So yes, there is potential for water contamination, and the idea of actually being able to light a flame from the water tap has been shown to be a real phenomenon in several of the areas. So there's a economic boom that has to be balanced against a quality of life with something like that. So this is another phenomenon that arose into the public consciousness around the same time. Marcellus, anything else? Is this all kind of gelling with what you'd heard about in relationship to fracking?
Yeah, that's pretty much the gist of what I've heard from it before. So yeah, it makes sense.
Okay. So a lot, again, going back to our text, a lot of these fears and anxieties are emerging from this era. And that's not too surprising, because if you look at the publication date of the text, let me see if I can find the actual information. There we go. I don't know if I can get it close enough, but 2011 is the original publication date, which means the hardback edition of this text, the first edition, came out in stores around 2012. So a lot of what happens in this book might seem antiquated by our standards today. We are essentially 8 years down the road from this book's publication. But there are still moments that do seem strikingly relevant, I would argue. Okay, so let's go back to Simmons here. What was your take on some of the concerns that Simmons raises in his article? Do you think that he raises good points to sort of underpin his argument? Or do you think he could have done a better job of laying out his argument? What are your general impressions?
Well, for me, the big thing I took away is, it is kind of scary that, at some point, all of these natural resources will probably run out.
Mm-hmm.
It is something that's just obviously the big thing I took away from it. That's what I focused on. It is worrisome, it is kind of scary. And then, you put that in the context of this book that we're reading, and you just kind of see like just the collapse of everything. You see how the people are living because of it. And it's just, it definitely, piques your interest, and, makes you just more aware that, something we take for granted, like gas, we go to the gas station to get gas, you really don't think about where it comes from. And yeah, and it just, you think one day, what if this wasn't here? And yeah, that's just kind of the big takeaway I took from it. And it just kind of made you think about just that whole process in general.
That's a very good observation. I think that understanding that small passage that I started reading at the beginning of the meeting, and thinking about the argument that Simmons is introducing, I think those elements begin to gel once we think about what kind of a world we might need to facilitate if there was a true limit on oil, or on some of these fuels that we rely on so heavily for energy. Because even in this pandemic, which is interesting, because of all the things to discuss, Simmons actually brings up a global pandemic as a potential problem that could rival energy consumption. He says that, I can't remember the exact passage, I'll look it up in a moment, but the idea is that this pandemic has taught us a little bit about how we can survive, and how well we can facilitate certain aspects of society if we had to. How well could we handle a severe limit on transportation, like going back and forth to work every day? If we really wanted to limit that, could distance or remote work or remote learning be a reality if we needed it to be because of energy concerns. Well, now we can say, yes, it might not be ideal and there might be ways to go to perfect it, but those things are now possibilities in the face of a global energy crisis. Or maybe we could even, going forward, look at some of the things that we were able to do as a society, do well as a society, and say, okay, we can do these things. So if we begin to implement slight measures, like perhaps, if you think about it, now this is relatively radical, okay, but I'm just using it as an example. Young people in school, so roughly up to age 17 to 18, and some college students as well, not all, but some, basically are off, right? They're on vacation for a certain amount of the year. So roughly from the end of May to the end of August, they're on break. So extending that sort of break mentality to the whole of the economy might be something that we could do. Now, we could do that under the auspices of rationing energy, so people may stay in place during those months. They may be on vacation or on break during those months. But then, there are all sorts of logistical difficulties that would come along with that too. But just as an example, perhaps, we could do something like that. So I think this book opens up, or rather, pardon me, I misspoke. I think this article gives us a greater sense of insight into the kind of reality that the people in this book might embrace more readily if they were forced to deal with the realities that Wade is describing. So if the distinctions, if your opportunities were limited to working online, going to school online, or going abroad to fight in a war for limited remaining resources, a reality like the Oasis may become that much more important. And the whole struggle to maintain a sense of parity and fairness within this virtual world may become much more critical to people living in such a situation. Any thoughts or ideas about that?
Well, I do think it's important. I also think, so part of the article I didn't like
Okay.
was he didn't reference, so when we started the Industrial Revolution, everything was on coal.
Mm-hmm.
And so
coal and steam.
coal, well, but the steam was created by coal.
Yeah.
Usually.
Right. Yeah.
Coal,
just go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say coal started to become scarce, and they switched over to oil.
Mm-hmm.
So part of what he didn't cover was, okay, what's the next thing we're gonna switch over to?
Right.
Because that's human nature to not want to give anything up.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll find a way to switch over to solar or whatever we need to switch, wind, whatever we need to switch over to be able to get the things that we want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would have go ahead.
And he didn't discuss the possibility of even switching over from oil.
Right.
And I know it's probably to prove a point, but you probably need to mention that.
I think those are both good observations, Madison. And I think you've pegged that article exactly correctly. There are alternatives that we could pursue, and he has a specific and definite agenda in his writing, which is to create a fear, a sense of anxiety, but also to do so in the frame of exploring just how fragile the economy might be because of its linkage, its strong linkage to a dependency on fossil fuels. So he wants us to understand how big the problem is, and also to become a little bit afraid of just how big the problem is. I believe in the hopes that he'd spur some sort of discussion or action on the part of his readership. So he definitely is trying to do exactly what you pointed out. Good observation. So in terms of his overall argument, I think that we see a couple of distinctive moves that he makes as an author, Matthew Simmons. Specifically, he clarifies right away what his objective in writing is by establishing a distinctive, precise thesis that without additional action now or in the immediate future, we very well could find ourselves in the midst of a very serious energy crisis, which would impact not only our way of living, but also our economy. He goes point by point to establish a sense of argument. And he then takes the next step, which is to give precise information to argue his or give support to his argumentative points. A successful argument then must contain those three things: a distinct thesis, clear points of argumentation, and evidence to support the thesis or and back up the established points of argumentation. As we continue on in the semester, we'll see other examples of argumentative writing, including the piece for next time, Plato's Allegory of the Cave, which will be accompanied by a little video. All right. We're out of time for today. This was a very productive discussion. And like I said, I will be in contact regarding peer review. Thank you so much for your attention today. And remember to continue to think critically. This is Mr. Fowler signing out